What's going on YouTube? This is SG1 Sports and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for the college football playoff eliminator as we head into week 8 of the 2023 college football season. So a lot of new eliminations this week. First, let's take a look at the teams already eliminated. You can see a big long list here. And again, every group of 5 team, they've been eliminated for a while. There are no teams that I think we still have James Madison and Air Force. They're not going to have a resume, even if they go undefeated, that comes anywhere close to the college football playoff. And then all these Power 5 teams that have 2 losses or more. A couple of 2-loss teams that we still have alive. If you've been following, you already know who those 2 teams are. But we'll get to them in just a second. Let's start here with the new elimination. So BYU, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Miami, UCLA, Washington State, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. All of these teams now with their second loss, and I just don't see a realistic path for any of these teams. I just don't think that Miami winning the ACC, for example, they're going to be strong enough. I don't see a path for Kentucky to win the SEC East. That would require Georgia to lose 3 games. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And a 2-loss Pac-12 champion, I don't think gets in. Big 12 champion, I just don't see a path for any of these teams. And so they're all eliminated. Now let's get to the teams that are remaining. We start with the undefeated teams, the Power 5 teams that are still undefeated. Florida State, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Penn State, and Washington. Are the 4 playoff teams going to come from these 4 or these 8 teams? We'll see. We'll see. Florida State and North Carolina don't play in the regular season, but they could, of course, meet potentially in the ACC championship. Probably will, the way it's looking right now. So you're either way, you are going to have a loss there. Then of course with Michigan and Ohio State, Penn State, they're all going to play each other. So you can only have potentially 1 undefeated team there. But you could, so that's 2. Then you could have Georgia, they could go undefeated. Then you could have Oklahoma undefeated, and you could have Washington undefeated. So we could get 5 undefeated Power 5 champions. Who gets left out in that scenario? That will be very interesting. I think Oklahoma might have the weakest resume when all is said and done, just because the Big 12 has not been great this year. But it will definitely be an interesting debate if it does happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we might wind up with 2 or 3 undefeateds, but not 5. All right, how about the 1-loss teams that are still alive? Alabama, Duke, Iowa, Louisville, Missouri, Ole Miss, Oregon, Oregon State, Tennessee, Texas, USC, and Utah. You look at these teams, who's the biggest surprise? I would say Louisville, but they had a pretty easy schedule to start the season. You know, you would flip the Notre Dame and Pittsburgh games around if you were looking at it in the preseason, and you wouldn't be surprised if they were sitting here with 1 loss. Missouri only 1 loss, a bit of a surprise, I guess. Duke, their win over Clemson, that's gotten them to this point. Iowa, as bad as they've looked at times, especially on offense, again, they're still sitting there with just 1 loss. And again, these teams are going to be playing each other, and this field's going to get narrowed pretty quickly with some big games coming up the next few weeks. But all these teams still have a chance. And again, when we get a little bit further, I'll start to break this down, and we'll talk about the teams that control their own destiny and the teams that will need help. Alabama, for example, Tennessee, for example, out of the SEC, Texas, I think. These teams control their own destiny. USC and Utah out of the Pac-12, I think they control their own destiny. Same thing with Oregon and Oregon State. Most of these teams probably do. Most of them probably do, but there's no guarantee. A team like Louisville, without a really tough schedule this year, they might need a little help. Missouri, they have a chance to knock off Georgia. They do that. They win the SEC, they're going to be in. I think they control their own destiny. Ole Miss, on the other hand, is going to need some help because they do not control their own destiny in the SEC West. And an 11-1 Ole Miss team may or may not get in. So again, most of these teams, if they win out, they're going to be in, but not necessarily all of them. Your 2-loss teams that are still alive, Florida and LSU. I talked about this the last several weeks. I've gone over the path for these 2 teams, and it's absolutely there. They'll need some help. They'll need to win out, but there is a realistic chance. Florida beating Georgia, that's going to be the big challenge. But if they can do that, Kentucky's already lost 2 games, so you don't have to worry about that potential tie. And if they win out, get a win over Florida State at the end of the season, I think Florida's going to have a really good shot to get into the college football playoff. I don't really see them running the table, but I'm saying if they do. And then LSU, if they run the table, they only need Ole Miss to lose one more game, and then they would control their destiny to get to the SEC championship. You knock off Alabama, you knock off, let's say Texas A&M is sitting there with just 2 or 3 losses. Then you beat Georgia in the SEC championship. There is a path there for LSU as well. And again, I've talked about that a lot the last couple of weeks. So now let's look at the updated playoff picture, the updated bracket here. I'm still going with Ohio State or Michigan there as the 1 seed. I think they're going to have a better resume than Georgia or Alabama. That's going to be interesting. We'll see what those first playoff rankings look like. That'll tell us a lot. Just a couple of weeks away from that. But yeah, I'm going with, the winner of that game most likely goes to the 1 spot. Georgia, Alabama winner going to the 2 spot. And this, again, is just based off of the favorites winning out. If there are no major upsets, this is kind of how it would shape up. These are not my predictions. My predictions haven't changed. You're not going to see a prediction video from me this week because I just haven't changed them. I'm still going with Georgia, Michigan, Texas, and Florida State. That's my playoff prediction. But this is just kind of if the favorites win out. And I know some of you are saying, what about Washington and Oregon? Why are they at 4 when you see Texas and Florida State, Oklahoma, North Carolina at 3? It's just because Washington and Oregon, they're not necessarily going to be favored in the rest of their games, whereas Florida State probably going to be favored in the rest of their games. And then it'll just be them and North Carolina potentially left. Same thing with Texas, Oklahoma. They should be favored in the rest of their regular season games. So you're looking at potentially Texas, Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, Florida State, North Carolina in the ACC championship. And they have a better chance than Washington or Oregon just because of the schedules. Washington and Oregon still have a lot of tough games left in the Pac-12. That is why I have them at 3 and Washington and Oregon at 4. If Washington runs the table and they go undefeated, I think they probably finish ahead of an undefeated Oklahoma and ahead of an undefeated Florida State because they're going to have a really good resume. So hopefully that clears that up. But yeah, North Carolina now in this picture for the first time. They're legit. I mean, they continue to really impress me, and so it feels like we're going to have North Carolina, Florida State for a playoff spot potentially, and then again Texas, Oklahoma in a rematch. And then there's Washington and Oregon. I think more than likely they wind up in a rematch in the Pac-12 championship game. USC's kind of fallen off. It doesn't feel like they're on the same level as Washington and Oregon. And so we could see that matchup again. And then there's Penn State. Penn State, again, I think there's a path for them if they go 11-1. If they split with Ohio State and Michigan, but they don't get to the Big Ten championship, or they win the tiebreaker potentially, are we going to move them to the 1 line? Well, if they beat Ohio State, then I think we start talking about Michigan, Penn State for number 1. So that's going to be a huge game, obviously, coming up on Saturday, and that will determine what this playoff picture is going to look like moving forward. But I think right now, everyone kind of favoring Ohio State over Penn State, and also Michigan over Penn State. And so that's why I have the Buckeyes and Wolverines there at that 1 spot. But these are the teams that have the best shot to get in the college football playoff. Again, changes from last week. North Carolina in, USC out, but we still have the same number of teams. We have, 11 teams here, and it feels like the playoff teams, the 4 playoff teams, are going to come out of these 11 teams. So this is the updated playoff picture. Thanks for watching, and give me your thoughts down in the comments below.